So this morning I made a video condemning Mark Cuban for banning the national anthem from Dallas Maverick games. And then a few hours later, I got a call from the commissioner of the NBA assuring me that he's going to require Mark Cuban and all the owners of every NBA team to play the national anthem. I'm just kidding. But actually what happened was I got home from work a few minutes ago and I got a text from my son Nick showing me the article where the NBA says that they are going to enforce the policy, that they're a long-standing policy that every team needs to play the national anthem and every player needs to stand for it. But what I wanted to address was, why do we do this? Why is it a tradition in America before sporting events to play our national anthem? I gotta say, honestly, I was really surprised at some of my comments, how so many people don't understand why we do this. The reasoning they gave me was just, I was just amazed. And then I'm gonna address some of the accusations that the national anthem is racist somehow. That I'm racist for supporting the national anthem and America is racist. And the guy who wrote the national anthem, Francis Scott Key's racist. But first I'm going to tell you how we started playing the national anthem before every sporting event, and then I'll get to the rest. So in 1918, during the Great War, which was then became known afterwards as World War I, after we had the Second Great War. It was the first game of the World Series, September 5th, 1918, in Chicago. Believe it or not, the Chicago Cubs were in the World Series. The Boston Red Sox were playing them. They still had Babe Ruth. And even though it was game one of the World Series, people weren't really enthused, really wasn't excited, because the war was dragging on. At this point, we lost over 100,000 men, Americans, to this great war. The day before the World Series, there was an explosion in Chicago that killed several people. The government just announced they were going to start drafting Major League Baseball players. So there was a lot weighing on the players, there was a lot weighing on the fans. This was a rough time, you know. This was a very sad time in American history. And there was one player, an infielder, I think it was a second baseman, named Fred Thomas. He was from the Navy, hoorah! And he was on leave, and he was able to play in, the Navy gave him leave to play in the World Series. And they say it was in the 7th inning, and the Navy band started playing the Star-Spangled Banner. They say Fred Thomas stopped in the middle of the game and just looked over at the flag and put his hand on his heart. And then it was like contagious. Every player did it, and everybody in the audience did it. And they just stood for a second a minute during the Star-Spangled Banner to honor the 100,000 fallen men who were fighting for our freedom and the freedom of these stands to enjoy an afternoon watching a baseball game. These men gave their lives. Sons and daughters, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers have lost their life so we could be a free nation. And at the end of the Star-Spangled Banner in that World Series, the New York Times reported that the crowd just shouted in applause, that the whole mood changed, that everybody was united, high-fiving each other, hugging each other, crying. And it brought a sense of unity to the American people that day, like, we'll get through this together, we're united. And then it kind of caught on a little bit here and there. And then in 1931, the commissioner of the NFL said, you know what, I'm going to make this a policy. This is good. This is good. And he made it a policy before every game they were going to play the national anthem. And then, as we got into World War II and we lost so many men again, it started spreading to all the major sports teams. You see, because they understood a biblical principle. To whom much is given, much is expected. These wealthy franchise owners and these players that were blessed to make a great living playing sports were honoring the men and women that died, that gave them that freedom and that right. And the people in the stands were honoring those men and women that died. This was what this was about. It was never questioned. No one ever questioned it as being something. It was something good. And when we get mad when owners like Mark Cuban doesn't allow it, we're not saying the government to force them. That's exactly opposite of our American values. We want them to voluntarily do this. And we want to voluntarily stand up. And I served in the military to give you a right, not to if you don't want to, if you choose not to. I'm not trying to force this down your throat. But what is the national anthem? How did people come to think it's racist? This really blows my mind. I just can't wrap my head around how people have been convinced that somehow the national anthem is racist. So you may have heard me tell this story, but I'm going to tell it again because the story needs to be told, and you need to tell it to your children and your grandchildren. During the War of 1812, when England was still pissed at America because a bunch of peasants defeated the greatest military of their time, they were coming back at America ferocious and violent. And one day outside of Fort McHenry, there was an English vessel, and a young lawyer named Francis Scott Key went aboard to negotiate a prisoner swap. And he asked the captain, "Can I see the prisoners before we negotiate?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, go downstairs, go ahead." And he's seen these poor, haggard military men locked up in chains, and they haven't eaten in days. They were starving, they were dirty, they were miserable. And he said, "Don't worry, I'm here to help you out. We're going to do a prisoner exchange with this captain." And they're like, "Oh, thank you, Francis. Let us know how it goes." So he goes back up on deck, and he starts talking about the negotiations. And the captain says, "This is all academic." And he goes, "What do you mean?" And the captain says, "Look behind you." So Francis looks back over the ocean, and he sees hundreds of British warships. So he looks puzzled at the captain, and the captain said, "On my command, we're gonna bomb that fort, and you guys are gonna surrender, and you're all gonna be my prisoners." And Francis Scott Key says, "You can't. There's women and children in that fort. It's not just soldiers." And he goes, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I already sent a messenger. You see that big flag? See that big flag waving? I told them if they lower the flag, we'll stop the bombing." So Francis went down and told the prisoners, and he's like, "No, they can't surrender. We can't surrender the fort. Tell them not to surrender." No one wanted that flag to go down. So Francis went up on deck and watched the bombing start. All night, they're yelling, "Francis, does the flag still stand?" And Francis says, "Yes, the flag is still standing." And they're like, "Yes." And all night, boom, the flag, they're bombing it. Finally, the captain looks and he says, "How is that bloody flag still standing? I want all guns pointed directly at that flag." So for the rest of the night, they're just bombing directly at that flag at Fort McHenry. And the prisoners start yelling up, "Francis, is the flag still standing?" And at this point, it was so dark. Francis says, "It's so dark, I can't tell. Can't tell." And they bombed all through the night. Then, at the dawn's early light, the prisoners yelled up, "Francis, is the flag still standing?" Francis looked out over the horizon and said, "Yes, the flag still stands." The prisoners shouted in joy, thanking Jesus and praising God for his grace. The captain was so mad, he's shaking his head, and he looks over at one of the sailors holding a telescope, and he says, "How is that bloody flag still standing?" So the sailor looked through his telescope, and he says, "Captain, it's being held up by dead Americans." And the captain goes, "What?" He said, "Apparently every time American that was holding it got shot and killed, another American climbed on top of them. There's bodies about 30 high, Captain." Dead Americans held up our flag, and the British withdrew. They withdrew. We never surrendered. The flag still stands, and we are free of the tyrants that wanted to take over America. Francis Scott Key says, "At that moment, when he heard that they were held up by dead Americans, he remembered the time he overheard George Washington say, "The Christian American would rather die on his back than live on his knees." We honor the national anthem because of those dead Americans holding up the flag. We honor the national anthem because of the dead Americans in World War I, the dead Americans in World War II that stopped true fascism and true Nazis from taking over the world. But I got to respond to these comments. But the national anthem, in one of the verses, it mentioned slaves. You know, there were still slaves when the rest of you guys were free. America was founded on racism. I'm not going to sing the national anthem. First of all, I've never even sung that verse. I had to look it up. And yes, it does mention slaves, but that was a reality. Slavery was evil, but it was real. And he just mentioned the reality of his time. But every corner of the world had slaves. Africa and Asia had more slaves than America at the time we had slavery. It was not uncommon to have slaves in your country. What was uncommon was for a leader to say, if slavery isn't evil, nothing is evil. Basically calling slavery evil. And the leader who said that was a president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. It was common to own slaves throughout the whole world. But what wasn't common was for free men to die to free those slaves. And 100,000 Union soldiers died. 100,000 Americans died to free the slaves. So when we stand for the national anthem, we honor those men as well. That all men are created equal. And it took years to get it right. But in less than 200 years, we elected a black president. We re-elected him. So we've come a long way. And the reason we've come a long way is because our founding fathers had so much wisdom that they put it in the Constitution, a mechanism to fix things. Because the Constitution, if you heard my interview with Dr. Alan Keyes, he said it so good, I just have to repeat him. The Constitution was based on the belief that all our rights are given to us by God, and in return, we have to live as godly people. So it was easy to see that slavery was ungodly. And we eventually seen it and we fixed it. So that's why after 9/11, think about this. The New York Giants, the entire football team, ran out on the field holding American flags. We were all united around that flag. There were no Democrat Americans, Republican Americans, African Americans, Italian Americans. We were Americans that day. We were Americans united to defend our belief that we're an exceptional nation. Not because of some race. We're exceptional because the principles that this nation was founded on, that all men are created equal before God and are endowed with certain unalienable rights. That's why we are an exceptional nation. We're a nation of immigrants. We're a melting pot. But we have that one thing in common. We believe in freedom, and we believe our freedom was given to us by God, so no government can take it away because no government gave it to us. So, I gotta eat dinner, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. God bless, and stay Catholic.